welcome to another episode of Fresh Look Book Girl. My name is Kayla, and I read a ton of books that I can recommend the best to you. And today is very exciting because I'm going to be recapping my Paris trip that I just went on, and I will be reviewing all 10 books that I read while on that trip. I think last week I said I thought I read 7 or 8, but I just counted. It was 10, and I will be discussing them all. So we're just going to get into it because me talking about the trip will probably take up half of the episode. I'm going to go through my itinerary. I kept a note in my phone with my plans for each day, so it was like very easy and handy to have on the go, so I knew what I was doing, and I will just like run through all of that first. So before we begin that, our November book club pick is Here One Moment by Liane Moriarty. That episode will be out next week. I have read it. I loved it. I did the thing where I recorded on my phone, the episode on my phone as I'm doing the book club. So it's recorded, it's done, it's ready to go. You will have that on Monday. Okay, so before, I guess I should like just tell you what this trip was. So I went on a solo trip to Paris. I was in Paris for 13 days, and then I went back to London for 4, which I will talk about on this episode too. I last year, if you're unaware, went on a giant solo trip. I was in the UK for a month. I was based in London. The first 2 weeks I worked remotely and did East Coast hours from there, and then I was off for 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks off, I traveled all over England. I went to Scotland for a few days, and that I was going on day trips every single day to Chatsworth, Blenheim Palace, just like everywhere that I could go. It was an amazing magic dream trip, and I knew right away, I was like, I am doing a yearly solo trip, not necessarily that big. This one was half the time, I think 2 weeks. This was 17 days, so it still was, it was long. It was like 2.5 weeks. I think 2 weeks is the sweet spot. I think it's the perfect amount of time. And I just think this one, the first trip, I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. And I was there for a month too, so it just felt very different. On this trip, I really was like, these trips have become so important to me. I already know where I want to go next year. I'm already like looking forward to it. It really helps me reconnect with myself, which like, I'm not someone that can't be alone. Like, I think to do these trips, you have to be okay with being alone. I love spending time alone. I always do try to do things that I love, but it really helps me. Every day of this trip, it was filled with doing something that I love and enjoy doing, and it helps me connect with kind of my favorite parts of myself. I love fashion and history and art and exploring and learning, and I got to do that every single day on this trip and really prioritize that. That's why I was there, to do all of those things. And obviously in your day-to-day life, you can do those things, and I try to bring those things into my daily life, but it's different when you're away and you're somewhere new and you're alone somewhere new, and it's just so exciting. And I just had like, it was perfect. Since I've been home for a few weeks, people ask me how Paris was, and I was like, it was perfect. So I chose Paris for this trip because Paris and London have always been like my 2 dream destinations. Australia actually was my first dream destination, which I probably won't make it there for like 5 to 10 years. It's not on my immediate plan. Because I feel like I want to be there for like a long time, and like I need to save up some money for that one. But when I first went to Paris, I spoke about this when I did those city themed episodes, but if you didn't listen to that, or just to reminisce, my London trip was the second time I had been to London. My Paris trip was now the second time I had been to Paris. And with London and Paris specifically, because they were cities that my whole life I have dreamed about, I felt like the first time I was there, both times it was just a 1-week trip. I was like in a daze and in shock, and I feel like I didn't get to fully experience the city. Both of those trips, but like I'll talk about the Paris one. Like, it was an amazing trip, but we weren't even in Paris for the whole trip. We went to Normandy for a few days, which was so cool, but there is just so much in Paris that I didn't get to do. So I knew immediately after I first went to Paris, I loved it so much, and I was like, I will be back. And I was supposed to go to Paris on my big UK trip. There was 1 week where I wasn't going to be in England. I was going to be in Scotland for like 2 days, and then I was going to Paris for 3 days, I think. But this is when those giant protests were happening, because they were trying to raise the retirement age, and like the garbage was on strike, and I was in London, and every day just like seeing it get worse and worse. And I one day, like barely anyone who follows me probably saw this because most of my followers are in the US. Actually, London is like a top city for me, but I posted it like when people in the US would have been asleep. And I was just like, I need an American in Paris right now to tell me if I should cancel this trip. And I got DMs from Americans in Paris, and the resounding consensus was to cancel it if I could. They were like, you don't, first of all, you're going to be alone. You don't want to get stuck here alone, which I was like, that is true. Like then I was starting to become worried about safety. Like if I went, who knows, I probably would have been okay, but I just didn't want to like leave somewhere where I was happy. It's not like I was home. If I was just like going to Paris from home, like I still would have gone on the trip. So I canceled it. I got refunds on pretty much everything. I think it was just like my ticket for the Louvre that I had already bought, which was like $20. At that point, I was like, it's fine. And I ended up extending Scotland, which I was so happy that I did because I wanted more time in Edinburgh to fully explore. So it all worked out for the best. But then since that happened, when I was on my UK trip, I was like, okay, Paris is next. And then I knew I'd wanted to go to Paris. I'd been talking about it for a while. And I last year, so not, it was in this year, in like April, I was supposed to go on a work trip, but this is when I had that ovarian cyst. I posted about it on my Instagram story like after it happened, but I was completely fine. It was the day of the eclipse. I saw the eclipse, and then I was like hunched over in excruciating pain. Extremely long story short, I had a giant ovarian cyst the size of a lemon that I didn't know until it twisted and like cut off blood to my ovary, and I was like in so much pain I literally threw up on the streets of Manhattan, which was just really fun. Thank God it ended up going away on its own after like a few days of agony. But because of that, my doctor was like, you cannot go on this work trip because if this happens in the air, like I was on like watch for a few days. If it happened again, I was probably going to need surgery. So I couldn't go on this work trip, and Delta would only give me credit. And because they gave me credit, work wouldn't reimburse me, and they were like, we're so sorry, whatever. And it was pretty expensive. So I was annoyed, but I'm like, do you know what? Like, I know I'm going to be traveling. Like I'd already paid off my credit card. I was like, it's fine. And then I started looking at flights to Paris, and I found a flight that it was New York to Paris and then London to New York, which is what I wanted to do. I took the train from Paris to London, which we'll get into, and it was the exact amount that I had credits for. So I did not have to pay anything because I'd already paid for those credits. So I booked the flight that night, and I was like, okay, I am going to Paris. And then I like my job, because I had a different job at the time. They gave me the time off, but then I got laid off. And literally the first thing I said to my mom was, well, I'm still going to Paris. And I didn't have a job when I got to Paris. Like I was starting a new job. So thank God I got my job before I went, because it just was like a big relief about money. I still would have gone and I would have had a good time, but it was nice to not have, oh, I don't have a job hanging over me. Like I got back and the next day I started my job. So that's kind of how it all came to be. A lot of the things I wanted to do, I like already knew. I went back to the itinerary that I had planned when I was supposed to go last year, and then I just knew things I wanted to do in Paris. And then this is the way I planned my UK trip as well. I would start, if I would see something on TikTok, or specifically TikTok, I would like it, and then I would go through. When I was ready to plan, I sat one day and went through my likes, and then I would put everything in a giant doc, and then I would group things together that I thought were nearby each other, things I could do in a day. And then I made a set number of itineraries for every day that I was there. And then I think when I went to London, I would like wake up and be like, oh, I'm going to do this itinerary today, unless I had tickets for something. This time I was a bit more not strict, but I was like a bit more organized with it. So I assigned the days before I went, because I was like almost every day, like I had bought a ticket for something, but I would move things around all the time. Like I would be like, I don't feel like doing that. Oh, I want to do this instead. Like, oh, I'm going to move this to this day. So that's also what's so nice about solo traveling, because if you're not feeling something, you don't have to stay there for a long time. If you are feeling something, you could stay longer. You can easily move things around, and you don't have to worry about what somebody else wants to do. So let's get into everything that I did in Paris. Oh, I also wanted to say before we start, the language. So going alone to a non-English speaking country obviously is daunting. I took French for 7 years in school, so I had a very good foundational base. And then I did Duolingo every single day for the 6 months before my trip. And I know like Duolingo is Duolingo, but I was doing it enough that I had gotten far enough in that I actually was learning useful things. And because I took it in school, so I had a good understanding of it, but I was very proud of myself for how well I was speaking French. Although by the end of it, like I was so happy to get to London and just speak in English, because I would like think about what I was saying before I said it, and it just becomes like very mentally exhausting. But I even like texted my mom a few days in, and I was like, I feel like I could become fluent if I lived here, because every day I was picking up on different things. I had the Google Translate app on my phone. So I would be like I knew one day I wanted to order another coffee. And so when the waitress came by, I said, puis-je avoir, wait, now I can't remember it. I was like, puis-je avoir un autre café, which my accent is horrible. I would get hundreds on everything in French class. Like I was very good at it, except for the speaking part. I would always lose points, but it was getting better being surrounded by it every day. It was very exciting. Like the first day I would pretty much get breakfast every day at this boulangerie near my hotel. And then in the second half of the trip, I got really into like sitting at a cafe in the morning and having like a long breakfast, which I will get into that when I get into the itineraries. But I would go into the boulangerie, and like at first I would be like, bonjour, je veux jouer un pain au chocolat. And then they got to know me. And like at first I didn't know how to order like a double espresso, and which is so easy. I just like didn't know what to say. And like she helped me. And then like every day, like I was seeing them frequently. So it was like they stopped speaking to me in English completely. And it was just like I felt very proud of myself. And when I was at Versailles, I ordered lunch fully in French, and then I responded in French too, because that was the hard part. Sometimes they would then say something back to me, and I just like wasn't fast enough. And usually they switched to English, which is very nice and very considerate, but I did want to practice. So this girl at Versailles didn't. And then she was like, your French is very good. She said it in English. And I was like, thank you. I'm so honored you said that. And I was like, it's hard. I was like, people usually switch to English. And she was like, yeah, but like it makes it easier. And I was like, she's like, but it's hard to practice. I was like, exactly. And I was like, I feel like Emily in Paris, like trying to speak French. And I was like, especially in this outfit, because I had like a very good outfit at Versailles. And her and another girl behind the counter started laughing. So I was like, okay, they like don't hate Emily in Paris. But it was very nice to be complimented on it. And then someone else complimented me too not long after that, and I was like, oh, like it felt really good. But I also noticed like if I was like so tired or so hungry, like my brain just could not translate, and I would be like je suis désolée, like je suis fatiguée, and like it was a whole thing. So anyway, so I'm just gonna go through day by day in my notes. So the first day I arrived on a Saturday, and I actually messed up and I booked my hotel to start on Friday, because in my head I was like, oh, I was leaving New York on Friday, but I didn't land there until noon on Saturday. So I paid for a night that I wasn't there, but it was actually nice because my room was ready. And then I did the thing that they say not to do. I did this when I got to London last year too, but I did sleep for like an hour because I didn't sleep well on the flight, and I was like, I just need to sleep a little bit. So then I went out, and I knew I stayed in the Latin Quarter, kind of near Shakespeare and Company, and I knew that there was a cafe at Shakespeare and Company, which like there's like places you can go whenever to get coffee, but I was like, okay, I'll just go over there. So I walked. It was like a 15-minute walk, not even like 10 minutes, to Shakespeare and Company, and got a coffee. And Shakespeare and Company is right on the Seine by Notre Dame. So I walked over there. I got a crepe. I walked through the Marais a little bit. And then that night I did a ghost tour at 7:30. I did a ghost tour the first night when I got to London too. I think booking something for the first night is like something kind of low key like that. That's fun and interesting. It'll keep you awake. And it'll keep you out until I got home that night at like 10. It's so helpful because you immediately need to try to get yourself like on like your body on the clock of the place that you're at. So that really helped me. But by the end of the tour, like even my tour guide was like, you're crashing. And I was like, I need to eat and sleep. And I was like, well, where can I get quick food around here? And she was like, honestly, only McDonald's. So I went to McDonald's, and they freaking have snack wraps in Paris. So I was very excited to be at McDonald's. I had it a few times on the trip because I love a snack wrap. And then I went back to my hotel, and I actually did not sleep well that night. So the next day I slept in a little bit, which was like, it ended up being fine, but um I did not sleep well. So like the next day I just felt insane, and I ended up buying like their version of melatonin, which was so good. It actually only has 1% melatonin in it. I don't like to take melatonin, but it's like magnesium and milk of the poppy, which is, I feel like I never take any sleep aids with milk of the poppy, and I think that's what really helped me. So I only needed to use it like 3 nights. And I had to buy a whole bottle. So now I just have it. Um Yes, and the next morning I woke up and I slept in a little bit. I went to that boulangerie near the hotel. And then I went to the Rodin, which was this sculptor Rodin, his house. And the gardens are really beautiful. I don't like to spend a ton of time at museums. So this is also what's so nice about being solo. You can just go in and out. Like even at home, sometimes I'll just go to the Met for an hour, like see the paintings that I like, and then bounce. So I went to the Rodin, and it was a really nice day out this day. And they had like an outdoor cafe in the garden. So I sat there and I read my book for a little bit, and I had a coffee, and which was like, I would do that so much on this trip, which was so nice. Cause you might be like, how did you read 10 books on this trip? But like, I really wanted this to be a slower trip. My London one was so go, go, go. And I ended up getting sick on the trip. And like, I definitely was so exhausted, and like, I was just shot by the time I got home. But I really prioritized like stopping in the middle of the day, reading my book, like having a coffee or something. I just like really enjoyed that. Then I went to Hotel des Invalides, which I'm just saying, like, I'm sorry if you're a native French speaker, my accent, like, I'm sorry. I've been back in New York too long. This was a hotel that was built by Louis the 15th, and the 14th or 15th. I actually think it was the 14th. And it was for wounded soldiers to come and stay. It still operates as a hospital for wounded soldiers, but it's also their war museum. So I actually don't think I saw everything there, because I was getting a little worried about not time, but like I wanted to make sure that it was still really light out when I was heading over to the Eiffel Tower after, and I knew I wanted to take pictures there. So I didn't spend forever here, but I very serendipitously was there on the last day of this Women in the World War II Resistance Museum. So I saw that. I saw World War II Museum. Actually, I didn't post about this because it felt weird and I did not take a photo, but in their World War II museum, like literally it's like really one long hall is what you walk down. And at the very end of it, there's this display that is just items that soldiers took from Hitler's house when like they invaded Germany, and like they went in, they found him and that he had killed himself. And I've been to so many different like World War II museums, things like that, but I've literally never seen that. And I had such a like visceral reaction. Like I believe that like objects can hold like emotions and things like that. And it was like looking at a Horcrux, like, and it was a full display, and like it was just like so eerie. And I like honestly looked at it for like 1 minute, and I felt like very disturbed. And then I left. But it was just like, it was really wild. And then also at Hotel des Invalides is where Napoleon's tomb is. So I saw Napoleon's tomb. It's like this beautiful former church. Huge. And it's like such like an architectural feat. And actually on my last day when I did a tour, the tour guide told me that when you're in Napoleon's tomb, you either look down at it or you look up at it. Like that's the only ways you can view it, because he didn't think that anyone was like eye to eye with him. So Napoleon. Then I also had lunch there. Then I went to Rue de Université, which is right by the Eiffel Tower. And that's where I got that really good photo of me on the first day in front of the Eiffel Tower. Also, I saved everything to highlight. So if you go to my page, Kayla, there's like a bunch of Paris 2024 highlights. So you could see everything that I'm talking about. I walked by the American Library because it's right there, and that's where the book The Paris Library takes place. I didn't go in. I looked in a window. It kind of just looked like a normal library. Then I hung around the Eiffel Tower for a bit. Then I went over to Champs-Élysées, and I was going to go to Galeries Lafayette, but actually the one there is not like the big main one. So I popped in for a second, but it wasn't what I was looking for. I was trying not to shop at this point, so I didn't go into any other stores on Champs-Elysees. I went over to Avenue Montaigne, which is right there, which is where all the big fashion houses are. So I kind of just like popped in, did some window shopping, had dinner at L'Avenue, which is on Avenue Montaigne. And actually then the next morning I woke up and found out that Joe Jonas was there like a few hours after I had been there. Then I went to the top of the Arc de Triomphe, which I did this the last time I was in Paris too. I think that is the best view of the city because you see the whole city with the Eiffel Tower in it rather than going to the top of the Eiffel Tower and not seeing the Eiffel Tower. And I wanted to be there at sunset because that was when I was there last time, but it just didn't work out. But it was beautiful being up there with the dark. Like it was like a gorgeous night out. And then that night I did a like river cruise on the Seine, which was fun. And like the Eiffel Tower, it was just like, it was cool. And then I was so tired and I went back to the hotel. Then the next morning was the Louvre day. So I woke up and I headed over to the Louvre and I did breakfast at Cafe Marley, which is where you sit and you like literally are looking at the Louvre. I did that the last time I went to Paris as well. Like you go for the view. The food is fine. It's a little overpriced. I did the thing where you got like 2 pastries, which like every breakfast deal there, it's like a pastry, coffee, and orange juice. I had so much orange juice on this trip. This one you get 2 pastries. But then I went into the Louvre. So I had a ticket for 10. I didn't get online until 10:30 because I was just like having like a leisurely breakfast. The view was so pretty and I was literally right there and I could see the line, how long it was. So I was like, oh, whatever. And then I got into the Louvre and honestly, the Louvre broke me a little bit. Part of this is that the shoes I was wearing, I have worn them, like I wore them once on a Christmas day in New York. So like on my feet all day. I don't know what happened on this day, but like my feet were in so much pain like this whole day. So that just like I started off on literally a bad foot. And then it was just so crowded and it was so hot and I was just like not enjoying myself. When I first got in there, I was like, wow, this is insane. I was like, oh, is this gonna be my new favorite museum? Not the Met, but no, the Met is still number one because the Met feels more manageable. It's like it's too big. But I went right to the Mona Lisa. I very easily got right up front. Then I went over and saw the Coronation of Napoleon, which is what I really wanted to see there. I saw Winged Victory, Venus, which I didn't even get close to Venus because it was just so jam-packed. And then Napoleon's apartments. Like I had literally made like a checklist on my phone. Those are the things that I knew I wanted to see. And then I wandered around a bit. I actually ended up sitting, there's a Starbucks in there, and I sat there for like an hour reading my book because I was just, my feet hurt and I was just so overwhelmed. And then I was like, okay, I'm here. So I went through there's like 4 sections. I went through every section. And then before I left, I did go back through and see like the Mona Lisa and Coronation of Napoleon again. And then I had a photo shoot outside of the Louvre. I saw people getting married. Then I was planning on going over to the Chanel on Rue Cambon to hopefully buy my Chanel bag, but they're closed on Mondays. I didn't realize that. So I went to Gallery Lafayette. But to do that, I walked through the Tuileries, which is right in front of the Louvre, which is like, I just freaking love the Tuileries. And then I walked over to Place Vendôme. I walked by the Ritz. I didn't go in last time I went inside the Ritz. And then I did walk over to Gallery Lafayette, like the one that you see online. And this is where I went into the Chanel there and I told them the bag I was looking for. And the woman was like, you are not going to find this bag anywhere in France. It's so hard to find. Like I wanted the mini classic flat bag, which is what I found. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm not going to get the classic flap, which I started doing this thing the first time I went to Paris, where when I travel, I buy myself a designer bag because they're cheaper to buy abroad and you get a tax refund as an American. So I knew I was going to get a bag. I wanted it to be the Chanel bag that I had been dreaming about my entire life. We'll get into that when I get to that day. But this woman like made me think it wasn't going to happen. So then I did some shopping around Gallery Lafayette. I fell in love with a Celine bag and I was almost going to buy it that day. But I called my mom and she was like, just wait until you go to the store you want to go to, like see if that's like it's the flagship store, it was the first store. If they don't have it there, then get this bag. So I was like, okay, I just like wanted it immediately, you know. So I'm glad I waited, although I did really love that Celine bag. Then I went over to University Bully, which you might be seeing. I saw all over TikTok, and you get these like customized lip balms or combs. The line was so long. She was like, you'll be waiting for like two, or it wasn't long, but she was like, there's maybe like 5 people in front of me, but she said like the wait was so long. Like she's like, it'll take like 2 hours because they customize everything right there. And I was like, honestly, I don't need these that much. Like they're expensive. I don't feel like waiting. I was over it. And then I went to do Magoo for dinner because it was right there and it was fine. The next day was Versailles Day. So I went to bed early that night because I had to get up early. I took the train to Versailles. I literally took like the metro. It was so easy and it was so cheap. And I learned this trick after I went to Versailles for the first time. So I made a reservation at Ore, which is the restaurant on property right in when you walk through the gates to Versailles. It's like right there. It's part of that main first part. And so I had breakfast there at 9 a.m. And once again, like that same deal, coffee, orange juice, and pastry. And I sat there and I was reading my book about Marie Antoinette. It was very cool. And then because I was already like on property, I got to skip the line and like literally just walk right into Versailles. So that's why in the pictures of me outside, people were like, is there no one around? Because I got in before so much of the crowd because I was already on property because of my breakfast. And then I did the whole tour of the palace. Honestly, inside I was getting a little overwhelmed at how crowded it was. It's these giant tour groups that like they're just following their ride and they just feel like they're in the way. Like I was getting so annoyed. And it was like getting a little overwhelming. So the last time I went, we didn't have much time in the gardens because we had to go back to the city for a dinner reservation. So this time I did not plan anything after. I was literally at Versailles for 10 hours. I was there from open to close and it still wasn't enough time, but I got to do everything that I wanted to. And then the next time I'll see like the parts of the garden, obviously I'm going to go back again. I'll see the parts of the garden that I didn't, but it was also so cool touring inside the palace again because, between Paris trips, I had watched the show Versailles, which is about Louis XIV and his court and the building of Versailles. So it was cool to like picture that. And like, I really understood the history from watching the show. And then I was in the gardens like all day. I went to the Petit Trianon, which was where Marie Antoinette lived. But before that, it was like, I think Madame de Pompadour lived there, or Madame du Barry, one of Louis XV's mistresses. I went to Marie Antoinette's Hamlet, which is this like fairy tale village. She had this village built and like she let real peasants live there and work the land. And she made it look like where she grew up in Austria. And it was just like, I literally felt like I was in a Disney movie. And then I went to the Grand Trianon, which is kind of just like a mansion on property. And it's actually where Napoleon lived at Versailles when he was emperor. And they still use it for state dinners. Like when Charles and Camilla went to Paris like last year, their state dinner was there. They said like when President Jimmy Carter had a state dinner in France, like he stayed at the Grand Trianon. So, and then I got kicked out 10 hours later. And then I went back into Paris and I didn't make any dinner reservations for this entire trip. So I just found a cafe. Sorry, I accidentally clicked out of my note and I can't find it. But I found a cafe right when I got off like a metro stop, and it was really good. I ate like steak frites almost every night on this trip, and I don't even care. It was so good. The next day, it was like 80 degrees outside, which was so beautiful, but I was sweating. And I started the day with a perfume class at Frognard, which is a famous perfumery, and it was cool, except like they decided the scent you were making. So they were like, our scent of the year is lilac. So they gave us like the notes were lilac, citrus, and vanilla, and then you got to mix it. The museum was cool. It wasn't very big. Like we got a guided tour through the museum, and then they brought us downstairs into the store, and we got to smell every single thing in their collection, and I ended up buying one of those perfumes. And then I went to Palais Garnier, which is the opera, which I highly, highly recommend. It is so, so beautiful. And I've never been to opera, but I really enjoyed I did like audio guide tour. I felt like it was just so cool. It was so beautiful. It was such like a very different, unique experience. And then after that, I went to Chanel Rue Cambon, And I went in and I made sure I was like dressed up. I was wearing like my Hill House dress that I love. I had my Mulberry bag with me. So it was like obviously not the same tier designer as Chanel, but it was like a designer bag. I wanted them to get the vibe that I will be purchasing because like unfortunately and luxury goods, like how you look is part of it. So I was very dressed up. I was helped right away. And the person, I said to the guy, I was like, this is my first Chanel. I was like, I've been dreaming about a Chanel bag since I was 12. This is what I want. And they had it. And he also showed me a bunch of other different ones. And he was like, I think because it was my first and he saw how excited I was, like, we just had like a really good time together. And it was, I have nothing bad to say about my experience at the Chanel store on Rue Cambon, which was the first Chanel store, which I wanted to buy it there. And it was like really, just like a really pleasant, great experience that I will always remember. And then I ended up walking from there to my hotel because it was so nice out. It's about an hour walk. And it was a gorgeous day. And until then, every day in Paris had been, or actually my first day it wasn't overcast, but it was just nice to like walk through like the Tuileries and by the Louvre and like a beautiful sunny day. And I went back to the room and dropped my bag off. And then I didn't use it right away because I was sweating so much that I did, because it was so hot out. I didn't want to like get it sweaty. So I left her behind. And then I went to the Saint Laurent Museum, which was in like the first Saint Laurent couture house. And it was fine. It wasn't like, it was like pretty small. And then I walked along Avenue de New York, like by the Eiffel Tower. And I ended up walking by the memorial for Princess Diana, which was so wild because it's like on top of where she died, like the tunnel that she died in. And then I guess I don't remember what I had for dinner that night, but that's that. Then the next day was my Disney day, but I was awoken that morning at 7 a.m. with my sister calling to tell me that Liam Payne had died, and One Direction were a huge, important, like pivotal point in my life. So I was very upset. And it was a weird way to wake up. And also my sister called me from Disneyland in California to tell me we were both in different Disneys across the world on the same day. But I woke up and you literally take the metro to Disney. Like it was so cool. And I still had a good day. I was just like in a bad mood because I was very upset about Liam, but it was so cool. And it's very similar to Disney California in that the Disneyland is like the Magic Kingdom, and then their other park, Disney Studios, is literally a shit show. Like it just seems like there's just like things randomly thrown there. Like Tower of Terror is on Avengers Campus. Like it just doesn't make sense. And they had announced at D23 of the summer they're building a Lion King land there, and I could see where they were building it. Like I could see the metal structure of Pride Rock, which that was cool, but it was like a shit show over there. Actual Disneyland Paris, it's like Magic Kingdom, which Magic Kingdom is my favorite park. So that was nice. And I just love, I've been to Disney in Florida, I don't even know how many times. And then when I went to Disney in California last year for the first time, I just thought it was so cool to see. It's like the same but different, and like can compare and contrast. And I love doing that in Disneyland Paris. I did get like a little, like I've never been to a Disney park without a member of my family. So I was like, this is kind of sad. But it was fun to like compare and contrast everything. And their rides are so good. Like their roller coasters are better. Space Mountain goes upside down. Their Big Thunder Mountain is so good. And they actually, like the day before I went, announced that they're refurbishing the one in Florida. And I hope they make it like the Paris one because it was so, so good. Terror, which is my favorite ride. So good. I just like had a really fun day there. Then the next day I slept in a bit. If you've been to Disney, you know, Disney is exhausting. So I was shot and I slept in and I had a really slow day. I went to Sainte-Chapelle, which is this medieval church right in the heart of Paris. And it was so beautiful. And then I went to the Concierge, which was it was a medieval royal residence. And then in the French Revolution, it was a prison, and it's where Marie Antoinette was imprisoned. So I toured that, and then I had like a nice long lunch, and then I went over to Louise Carmen, and you can look them up on TikTok, but I got a custom journal that I've been using every day for work. There's like a to-do section and then notebook section. And I knew going into this trip, I was like, oh, maybe I'll find like a cute work notebook in Paris. And I found like the perfect one, and it's like the perfect souvenir. So very exciting. And then that night, I met up with Emily, the Lazy Library, my former podcast co-host, and we went to a show at the Moulin Rouge, which was so wild. It was not what I expected at all. It was fun. I'm glad I went. Like, it was definitely a touristy thing, but it was like not what I expected, and I don't know how to describe it. Like, they would do ballads and like, it was just, it was fun though. It was like a fun experience. Then the next day I was with Emily and we went to Shakespeare & Co. and we went like bookstore hopping this day. So we did Shakespeare & Co., Smith & Son, and Galigny, which those two are by the Louvre and they're English speaking bookstores. We went to Angelina. We tried to get in, but the line was too long. So we ended up just buying macaroons. And actually, what I learned on this trip is that I prefer Angelina macaroons over Lauderay, and their caramel macaroon is insane. Like, I was just constantly buying things of macaroons and like having them in the room, and like when I would run out I would buy more. And honestly I should just do that at home because it was like so lovely. And then that night we did the catacombs, which was crazy. I could not have done it alone. It was kind of scary, it was very eerie, and we were joking, we were like, should we go to mass in the morning? Like because we were just by so many bones. But we like, I'm glad that we did it together because I could not have done that alone. Then the next day, Emily was still there, so we went to Angelina for brunch, and then we went to the L'Orangerie to see Monet's Water Lilies paintings. Then we went over to Montmartre, and the plan was to go to Sacre-Cœur, but on our way to Sacre-Cœur, we ended up doing so much shopping. There's like so many like really cute little boutiques over there. Like, we both bought a ton of like jewelry. And then we went to this place I found on TikTok, Le Comte de Madeleine, which they're Madelines, like the pastry, and they're stuffed with either like chocolate or caramel or like some other flavors, and they were absolutely insane. Like, the best thing I have ever had to eat. We were amazed. And then Emily, we actually had dinner together, and then she left. And then the next day I had like a very leisurely breakfast at a cafe, and then I went over to Place des Beaux-Arts, which is a really pretty park in the Marais. I walked around the Marais for a little bit, and then at 3 p.m. I had a French Revolution walking tour. So we ended up walking by things I had already like seen on my trip, but just hearing them in relation to the French Revolution. Then I went over to the tribute that they had in the Tuileries for Liam from One Direction. And then I went down by the Place to Concorde. I went to Jardin du Palais Royal, which is so, so beautiful. I had not like gone there on my first trip. I feel like it's like a hidden park. If you're Parisian, it's probably not hidden to you, but like for visitors, it's so gorgeous. And then I walked by Emily in Paris's office, Agence Grotto, and then I went to Emily told me like this chain, I forgot what it's called, for good steak frites, and so I went to the one on Champs-Elysees, and then I went to bed early because the next day I had to be up so early because I went on a day trip to Mont Saint Michel, which is this like 1,000-year-old village that's like an island. It looks like Game of Thrones. Like, I made a vlog of it. Go to my page and look at it. It was so beautiful. So I booked it through a group. So I got on a coach bus with a bunch of people, and it was a 4-hour drive each way, and we were only there for 4 hours. So it was a very long day, but it was so worth it. Like, it was just insane. It's actually not very big. Like, it's really just like one winding road up to the Abbey. So I went up to the Abbey first and then made my way down, and then I went outside and like looked at it from outside, and then I went back in and kind of just wandered around a little bit more before we had to get on the bus. But I'm so glad that I did that. It was so beautiful. Then the next day I had another like nice long cafe breakfast, and then I went over to Luxembourg Gardens for the first time, and I was like, I can't believe I waited this long to go here because it was so gorgeous and it was a beautiful day, and like it was just stunning, like perfection. Like, I can't believe that's just like in the middle of a city. And I sat there and read for a bit, and then I wanted to go to Red Wheelbarrow Bookstore, which is an English speaking bookstore right there, but it was closed. So I walked by it, and then I went to Marin Montaigne, their store. This is an artist that I really love, and I bought a piece of art for my wall. And then I just picked up like a sandwich on a baguette on the go as I walked for lunch when I walked over to Musée d'Orsay, which I really liked, but it was a bit smaller than I thought. I saw the Van Gogh, I saw like the Monets. I'm into like the Impressionist paintings, but it was fine. It wasn't my favorite, but it was like, I'm glad I went. And then I went to Petit Palais, which is also like an art museum, and I sat in the gardens there and read for a bit. And then I went back up to the Tuileries and I sat in the gardens there and read, and then walked by the Louvre again for the last time, and I think the last time. But then ended up being over there on sunset, and it was like a gorgeous sunset. And then I went to dinner where I wanted to go on the French Revolution tour. He took us by this restaurant where like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, like they used to eat when they were in France, trying to get the French to help us in our revolution. But I couldn't get a table, and there was a place next door that I got a table there, and it was like my favorite meal of the trip, and it was my last night in Paris, so it was like perfect. And then I went back over by the Eiffel Tower to watch it sparkle for one last time. And then the next morning I did a sidecar, like motorcycle sidecar tour. So I was in a sidecar of a motorcycle, and we went around all the monuments, and my guide would like tell me things, and then he was like, you know everything, like, because he would try to tell me history, and he was like, you know everything, and I was like, I know. And there was one thing I didn't know, and it was that when the Germans occupied France in World War II, when Hitler came to Paris, he went to see Napoleon's tomb. But like I said before, you can't look at it at eye level. You're either looking down at it or looking up at it, like in deference. And he refused that. So he had them like set up a mirror for him to look at it through the mirror so he could be eye level. So, fuck him. Then I went over to Trocadero Fountain, which I don't even remember what that was. And I had lunch, and then I went to the Dior Museum. This was the only time I could get it, which was kind of stressful because I was heading to London this day. So I kind of just I walked through it very quickly. I wish I could have spent more time. It was very similar to when there was a Dior exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum in New York, but really cool still. But I was in a rush because then I had to go to the hotel, grab my bags, and head to Gare du Nord because I got on the Eurostar to London, which was like such a lovely experience. It was so easy getting through customs. I had to do my VAT refund there. It was so easy. I got there so early because I didn't know what to expect, because you go through security like at an airport, but it was like really easy, seamless process. The train was great. It was only like 2.5 hour train ride, which was insane. Like for me to go home, it's an hour and a half from the city to where I grew up is an hour and a half. So that was wild. And then when I got to London, I stayed at the same hotel that I did on my big London trip, dropped my bags off. First stop is always Nando's. And then I went over by Big Ben just to see it and be like, oh, I'm in London. And then I went to bed because I was so tired. Then the next morning I had tea I actually ended up doing breakfast at the Orangery at Kensington Palace on property. I have always wanted to go there, and I finally was able to get a reservation. It's so beautiful, and the food was like amazing. And then I went inside Kensington Palace and I toured it, which that was my third time doing it, but like it hits every single time. And then I walked through Kensington Gardens to Hyde Park, like they're connected, and I went to the memorial for Liam there at the Peter Pan statue, which was so heartbreaking. And that is when I finally broke down and cried, and it was so big, and they had like notes, note cards and pens everywhere, so you could write a note, which I did, and it was just like really sad. But then I walked through Hyde Park up over by Buckingham Palace, and then I walked through St. James's Park, which I love St. James's Park, up the mall, and then I went to the National Portrait Gallery, which was closed both times that I had been there. So I finally got to go to that. I went to the Waterstones in Piccadilly, then I went to the National Gallery, then I had a pub dinner. I got a pie. I love a pie. And then I went to the V&A, which was open until 10 p.m., which was really cool. And I love the V&A. Their fashion exhibit is just so, so good. And that was my first day in London. Then the next day, I met up with my friend Sam. He's Monster Marble on Bookstagram, and we had brunch. And then I didn't post about this, but we walked out of brunch and Katie from Vanderpump Rules was standing right there. So we said hi to her, and we had literally just been talking about Bravo. It was so crazy. And then him and I went to Foyles together, and it's like fun to bookshop with another book lover, and we just had like literally the best time. And then it was very sad he had to leave. And I then went up by the Wallace Collection. I went over to Marylebone after this. So I went to the Wallace Collection, which is this free art museum. It is so beautiful. And I was like pretty in and out there because I had like been there before. Across the street from the Wallace Collection is this store, Giovanna London, which is like my favorite store in the world. I basically buy a new wardrobe every time I'm in London and I go there. They have a few locations, but the one in Marylebone is the biggest. And then I went to Daunt, and then I dropped everything I bought off at my hotel. And then I went to this pub in Notting Hill, the Sun and Splendor, which I went there a few times on my last trip. And then I went there for dinner, and then I went to see Six because I love that musical. And then the next day was my last full day of the trip. So for breakfast, I started the day in Notting Hill. I went to Buns from Home for breakfast and got a cinnamon bun. It was very good. It was a Sunday, so like the market was open. So I wandered through the markets. I was like, because I traveled from Paris to London, so like I knew I had a very bad luggage situation. So I really was trying not to buy, and I just bought so many clothes at Giovanna. So I was like being strict with my buys. But I did Notting Hill Market. Then I went over to, I walked over to Kensington Gardens, and I sat in the park and read there, and it was very lovely. And then I went to Nando's for lunch because obviously, and then I went over to the Imperial War Museum, and I thought that 3 hours would be enough time, but it absolutely was not. I only saw half of the museum. It is so well done, so good. Like next time I go to London, I have to go back and literally spend a whole day. And then for dinner, I went to Old Bank, which used to be a bank and is now a pub, and I had a Sunday roast for dinner there. And then Monday was the day I was going home, so I kind of just wanted to do like a little walk through all of my favorites. So I walked over to Kensington Palace, Buckingham Palace, St. James Park, went by Westminster again, which is like Big Ben, Parliament. And then I went to the airport, and that was my trip. I feel like we could end the episode there, but no, I have to tell you about all the books that I read. But it was just like amazing, perfect. Like I had so much fun. I loved it so much. And now I can't wait to start planning next year's trip, which I'm gonna gatekeep where I want to go for now, because who knows what the world or my life will look like. So the first book that I read, I started this on my flight to Paris, was The Paris Gown by Christine Wells. I really like her other historical fiction. This is probably my least favorite of the ones that I've read. This is 1957 Parisian historical fiction. We follow three girls, Margot, Gina, and Charlotte. They're very different, but they were all best friends in Paris for a while, and then their lives went different directions, and then now they're suddenly back in Paris together. So Margot is Australian, and I feel like I can't say without spoiling, but she ends up, well, first of all, the whole thing is that the three of them are obsessed with like walking by Dior and looking at the dress in the window, and they like all have this dream of one day wearing a Dior gown, which is the Paris gown. So Margot ends up like, when we re-meet her in the 50s, she's running away from like a past in Australia, and she's working at Dior. Then there's Gina, who was married to a guy or was engaged to a guy in politics, but had to break it off. And she's kind of like left her high society life in New York behind to come back to Paris. And then there's Charlotte, who is French, and she's a chef, and she is like, her family is selling their restaurant, and she has to deal with all of that. So the three of their stories, like, I was really into Margot's story and Gina's story. Charlotte, I thought, was a little bit boring. I felt like it was a little like it wasn't about fashion, which is what the cover and the title leads you to believe. Like the dream of them having the Dior gown, like, is a part of the book, but it's not a fashion book. It was fine. I gave it 3 stars. The next book that I read was Days of Splendor, Days of Sorrow by Juliette Gray. This is the second in a 3-book historical fiction series about Marie Antoinette. I read the first book before my first Paris trip, and then I heard this one at Versailles, just casual. This one I liked the most of all the books. I gave this one 4 stars. And so the first book ends with Marie Antoinette becoming queen, and then this book is from the day she becomes queen to the start of the French Revolution. So kind of like the glory days, literally. I think glory is in the title. No, splendor. And I really liked it. And a goal I had for this trip was to learn more about the French Revolution, because it's such a wild and complicated piece of history. Like, it was so messy. The French Revolution was so messy. So this helped me kind of start like piecing everything together, because it was learning like the beginnings of the revolution through her perspective. Like there was this thing that so many things led to the revolution, but one of the things was this scandal that happened where this like woman was like a scammer basically and ordered this insane like multi-million dollar diamond necklace and said that she was buying it for the queen, but they had no idea, like Marie Antoinette had no idea who this woman even was. And it was like a lawsuit and it was this whole thing, and like the guy who sold it like wanted his money, and the public like didn't believe Marie Antoinette because they hated her. So like that scandal plays out in this book. So just like really seeing like the groundwork for the revolution, but then also like the fun parts of Marie Antoinette are in this book. So I gave that 4 stars. Then I read The Modern Fairies by Claire Pollard. This is so unique and so hard to explain. So I actually read most of this on my Kindle app on my phone while I was in Disney because I was alone. So when I was waiting on lines, I was bored. And it's really about the advent of fairy tales in Louis XIV's court. So I was reading it the day, or like 2 days after I'd been to Versailles. So like it was fun to really picture everything. It was really fun to read about the origins of all of our famous fairy tales, like Snow White particularly, like is in this book, like that story is in this book while I was in Disney. So it was a really lovely reading experience. It is so unique. It is so well written. I think if you like fairy tales and French history, then I would pick this one up. And actually something funny happened when I was in Shakespeare and Company with Emily. I saw this and I didn't realize that I had literally just read it because the UK, like Shakespeare and Company stocks the UK covers because that's where they like buy it from. And it's so different. And I was like, wait, I just read, we're like, look at this. And I was like, wait, I just read this. And I told Emily what it was about. And then we like walked into a different room and then this girl like followed us in and she was like, wait, what was that book you were just talking about? I want to read that. So like your girl is never off the clock. I'm just always convincing people to read books. But I really enjoyed that. I gave it 4 stars. Then this was my favorite book of the trip. I read Ribbons of Scarlet by Kate Quinn, Stephanie Dre, Laura Kamoe, Eliza Knight, Stephanie Pierno, Heather Webb, and then the foreword was by Alison Bataki. So this is the French Revolution historical fiction. So basically it's pretty much like you're reading 6 different novellas. So each author had a woman who was a part of the French Revolution, and they have like their own little novella. So like you just read about one woman and then the next one, and it goes like kind of in chronological order of the revolution. And you obviously it's all connected, so like they'll pop up in different ones. But it was just what a treat to have all of these amazing historical fiction authors on the same title. Like that in itself, I was like, this is amazing. But I learned so much from this book to the point where when I went on my French Revolution walking tour, I knew everything already from this book. So if you want to learn about the French Revolution, this is the one to do it. And I think obviously the experience was heightened because I was in Paris, but this would have been a 5-star read regardless because it's everything that I love about historical fiction. It is history and it is women's stories and how women shaped and changed history, and all of that happens in this book. And now more than ever, we need to be focusing on that. So just so good, so cool. And I was reading it the day that I went to the concierge, and which, like I mentioned, it was a former royal residence and then used as a prison in the French Revolution. And the part where you're like in the woman's courtyard, they had like things up on the wall of like famous women who would spend time in there, and 2 of them were characters in this book. Like I literally pulled the book out of my bag and like to check, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. So like walking in their footsteps as I was reading it, but I learned so much. Like 5 stars. I was obsessed with it. Like Emily was with me for some of the days I was reading it, and we got back to our hotel and I was like, let's have reading time because like it's not weird for us to want to like sit and read. But I was like, I need to read this book. So loved it. Then I had a little bit of a slump. I had a few 3-star reads, but it's fine. So the next book I read was The Paris Network by Siobhan Khurram. This is a World War II historical fiction about a woman who kind of falls in love with a down Allied pilot. Inspired by real things that happen. It just like, I read so many books like this that it just like didn't beat all the other ones that we know and love. I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Mademoiselle Eiffel by Amy Runyon, and this is the story of Claire Eiffel. Her dad was Gustave Eiffel, the guy who built the Eiffel Tower. I read this whole book when I was on the bus ride to and from Mont Saint Michel. It was fine. I liked learning her story. Like, she worked as an architect with her father, and it kind of all is centered around the lead up and then the building of the Eiffel Tower for the 18 something Paris World's Fair. It just, like, not enough of the book was about the Eiffel Tower, I would say. It was about her whole life, and I just went into it assuming it would be more about the Eiffel Tower. And it was like, I don't know. I didn't love it. Honestly, I didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars. Then I read The Paris Showroom. This is another World War II historical fiction, and I felt like I was bamboozled by this one a little bit too, because they made it seem like it was going to be more fashion based. It wasn't. So we have 2 characters. The first one is Capucine, and her and her dad are taken prisoners by the Germans because they're communists. And this actually is something that happened, and I've seen it referenced in other historical fiction novels before, but some of the prisoners, the Nazis housed them in a department store, and they would make them work in the store, and like they would take like looted goods from the Jewish people that they were deporting, and have that, then like high-ranking Nazis and their wives and girlfriends and mistresses could come in and like quote unquote shop. So she is one of those people. So that was really interesting to learn about, but actually I preferred the other point of view, which was her estranged daughter, who, like, she was raised by her grandparents from her dad's side of the family, and her grandparents are like collaborators, and when she realizes what's happening, you really see her like wake up to the reality of what's happening in the world around her, and then she goes on this quest to try to help and save her mom. I gave it 3 stars. Like, it was fine. Then I read The Queen of Paris, which is a novel about Coco Chanel. I gave this 3 stars. The problem wasn't really the book. It's that I've read so many books about this woman and like I know her story. I can reenact it for you. I did have one problem with this though, and she admitted the author admitted in the author's note that like she fabricated some things. I don't understand why you have to do that when the truth with Coco's life is stranger than fiction. Like, why are we making things up when you don't need to? You already have like an amazing story right there with her life. Then now we're in the books I read in London. I read Confessions of Marie Antoinette, which is the 3rd and final book in that series, when I was in London. It's just how it worked out. I didn't really plan it that way, but that's how the cookie crumbled. So this follows Marie Antoinette's life from the start of the French Revolution to her death. And I felt like I knew everything already at this point because I had learned so much about the French Revolution through Ribbons of Scarlet and like the walking tour and just like other like studying I was doing on this trip, honestly. So that, it was kind of boring, and some things like felt a bit repetitive, but yeah, what a life. What more is there to say? I gave that 3 stars. And then the final book I read was Emma of 83rd Street by Audrey Balaza and Emily Harding. I gave this 5 stars. So I heard that this was a very New York book before reading it. So I was like, oh, like, I'm reading it in London. I was like, honestly, like, it's a Jane Austen retelling, so I feel like it's okay to read in London. I read this on my Kindle in a day, and like that day that I went to the Imperial War Museum, and like I said, I like read at Kensington Gardens, and then I had like this is what I love about being in Europe. You just like sit at a dinner table for hours and they don't kick you out. So like I was at my Sunday roast for hours, just like I sat there and I read and like had dinner, and then I didn't have to order dessert right away. I could wait a bit, and I read this whole book, but I couldn't put it down. So good. It's an Emma retelling. So if you've read Emma or if you've seen Clueless, you know the plot of the book, but she is so New York, so Blair Waldorf. She loves history. Like the Met is a big part of it. It's very fashion. It's just like so good. It was so, so good. I literally couldn't put it down. I was like it was in my favorite city, London, and looking for any excuse I could to read it. So that was a 5-star read. And also I didn't say when I was going through the itinerary, because I was kind of just like busy going through my note, but it felt so good to be back in London. And like when that day that I was reading Emma of 83rd Street in Kensington Gardens, actually, like right as I had gotten up, my dad called me and he was like, how is it? And I was like, it feels so good. And I was like, it's so crazy. Like, I don't feel like a tourist. And he was laughing. He's like, well, you've spent enough time there. But like, it felt like how I feel when I'm walking around New York. Like I'm like, oh, I know this place. This is familiar to me. And that was so cool because I love London so much, and look, like I really fell deeper in love with Paris on this trip, but London will just always hold like such a special place in my heart. If I could live in one of the two, like I would live in London. I need to figure out a way to get to London. Um, but yeah, it was such a perfect, wonderful dream trip. And if you were thinking about doing a solo trip, this is your sign. Book the trip. You will not regret it. It is the best gift you could ever give yourself. I'm obsessed. Like I'm obsessed. And like I'm obsessed with myself, honestly. Like I love that I do this. I love that I'm confident enough and brave enough to do it. And I was thinking about this on this trip. I was like, it's not luck that got me here, but it's luck that I have parents who always encouraged me to do things like this, and that it never seemed like something that I couldn't do. I knew I could do it, and I loved it. I'm going to keep doing it forever. And that is our show. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure you're following, subscribe to whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Follow me on Instagram at Cared About. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl. Leave a rating and review, and I will see you. Is next week book club? No, book club's in 2 weeks. No, next week is book club. I will see you next week for book club. Bye. I've never ended the episode saying bye. That was weird. Okay, wait. I filmed that whole episode and forgot to acknowledge that it is 1 year Professional Book Girl. This podcast is a year old now. If you just got here, if you find here from the beginning, thank you so much for being here. I do this for fun. Like I really don't get there's no monetary compensation or anything. I do this because I love to do it. I hope you guys love it. So thank you so much for being here. I love you and I appreciate it more than you will literally ever know. And yeah, to more reading and books and Professional Book Girl.